Hi, this is Barbara Davis. I'm the executive minister here at the First Presbyterian Church in the city of New York, and happy to welcome you again today to our new podcast, First the Questions. This is episode 2, and I'm here with Sophia Canfield, our interim director of communications. Hi, Sophia.
Hello, it's good to be back. We're here so quickly again. I'm so excited.
Here we are.
Yeah. Today's going to be a little bit different from last week. Last week we talked about a few questions that came out of one of our adult education classes, one of our Bible studies. Today, the questions are about you, Barbara.
Indeed.
I'm excited to ask you. I'm just going to go over a couple of the questions, just very general. Mm-hmm. Where are you going on sabbatical?
The big question.
Yes, and what are you doing on sabbatical? If those who are listening don't know, Barbara is finally taking her sabbatical.
It is, I suppose, overdue, so yeah, it's exciting. And those two questions have been the big questions that everyone's been asking me over the past months, getting very close to being away on sabbatical.
Yes. Well, I'm very excited to hear more. If you want to just start us off on where you're headed. Are you going anywhere? Are you just hanging out for a little bit of relaxation?
Yeah, more of the latter. So mostly just hanging out for more relaxation. So no special travel plans. I may end up, being here and there, but I've been joking with people that I'm just going to try to stay east of the East River. I feel like there's been a lot of commuting and a lot of back and forth, so I'm really excited to just not have the swing through Manhattan 5 or 6 days a week on my schedule. So very excited about that.
Good. I'm very glad that you're going to finally be able to not have to travel quite as much, but maybe you'll take a couple of trips with the girls or something around the city.
Yeah, I hope so. And my mom's birthday is in September, so we might do a out to Ohio trip sometime in the fall as well. So, and we have an annual trip to Ithaca in upstate New York, so we'll definitely make that trip happen this year also. So
good.
All those free Sundays, though, I don't know. I could just be all over the place.
It's so much freedom now.
It is.
But you usually commute on your bike, right?
I used to do a lot more bike commuting. Okay. The bike lanes in Lower Manhattan have just gotten kind of crazy, so I tend to just ride, in closer to home. It's a little more relaxing. So, but I'll be on the bike a lot for sure. That'll be big parts of my journey in the fall. Will be riding around Brooklyn and Queens, my two favorite boroughs to bike in.
So if anyone spots Barbara, don't bother.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. You also mentioned to me that you were going to be doing some more reading while you're away. Yeah,
I've been calling this my rest and read sabbatical when people have asked me. So that's there'll be plenty of reading, I think, on this time off for sure.
You have it branded. You got your motto.
That's right.
Yeah, rest and read. R&R.
I knew I was going to need an answer, right, to these questions, which have really this month have gotten that a lot. So yeah, I like the alliteration of that too.
Yeah.
Rest and read.
Yeah, well, and it's like R&R, but you're changing up just
That's
for
right,
you.
just a little bit. Yeah.
It's very fitting. I love it. Did you want to share, if you would be so kind, what is on your list?
Yeah, so the reading list has also been sort of a question.
Highly
and
requested.
I know you and I have been talking about that a little bit, Sophia, but lots of folks have been asking me, what are you going to read? Mm-hmm. So I was saying I think it will be sort of a surprise to people how little theology is on the list, and maybe they'll be glad about that in some ways. So because there's no particular project, I feel like I have a lot of freedom to read a lot of different things. Yeah. So I've been reading a lot of fantasy lately. And some science fiction, so I'll probably stay in that vein for a while. And many folks in the congregation know that I'm a big lover of poetry, so I've been thinking a lot about how much poetry I can read and how nice that will be to just kind of move around within that. So, so I have a couple of specifics, though, that I'm willing to share. Although I must say, this is, I think, the third reading list for sabbatical that I've made.
Oh wow.
So
Isn't
it
there
could
so
change
many?
again. I don't want to, I don't want to steer anyone in the wrong direction, and I'll definitely be reading these things. But as of right now,
Okay.
this is what the plan
Okay.
looks like.
Let's hear it.
So there's a really great little series of books by primarily science fiction writer named Becky Chambers,
Mm-hmm.
who wrote a book called A Psalm for the Wild-Built.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one in that series is called A Prayer for the Crown-Shy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very interesting premise. The two main characters in these books are a monk who is a tea monk who has like basically like a bicycle cart that they also live in, but they ride around to these different communities and basically create what we would call worship space with tea for people. And in the first one of these books, this monk decides that they want to go and see this old abandoned monastery that's in a different part of the landscape. And on that journey, where there are no other sort of humans, they meet this robot named Moscap. And the robot and the monk sort of hit it off, and they end up, well, it takes them a while to hit it off, in fairness. The monk is not real excited about like this robot coming along for a whole host of reasons that I won't give away at this point. But they end up having these really wonderful conversations about kind of the purpose of life that are just fascinating. And so I'm really excited to read the second one in that series, A Prayer for the Crown-Shy, to kind of see what other conversations they sort of get into. It's one of those things where it's like this incredibly smart way to talk about theology and philosophy within the context of this relationship. So
I love
I'm
that.
pretty excited about that.
You know that I love fantasy and anything sci-fi with my background, but it sounds like very realistic for like our society today too.
Oh yeah.
It sounds really relatable, which I find really interesting. But it is so the monk and the robot. The monk, you said that there's not a lot of humans in it, or
No, not really. I mean, especially not in the first one. The monk kind of left the places in their kind of world where the humans were living and went to the place more where, there are more robots there, but they're also kind of tucked away. So it's really just sort of the two of them and the environment that they're in. So there's not a lot of other characters kind of coming into their conversations. So that's also very interesting.
So it's not set in a certain like year that we would be familiar with.
No, and I think it's meant to be set like in a completely different planet or something. Although it's not real clear that that's the case until a little later on. So,
got it. Okay.
Yeah. And I actually think this author, that's one of her great gifts in her writing. Her science fiction series is similar in that way, although you know that you're not on Earth. But exactly what you said, like she's really able to take like issues that we're thinking about in today's world and apply them to the story, where you're reading along and you're like in this fantasy world and you're like, wait, what did she just do there? And so I really like that about her book. So I'm excited. And these are short. These are like little novellas. They're like 150 pages. So they're really accessible as well.
Oh, that sounds like a really easy summer read.
Yeah.
I love it. What else do you have on your list?
Well, a couple other things. The next two are a little bit more, the first one at least, like very theological. There's a new book out, and folks may have heard about this. There was an interview with the author on NPR a couple of weeks ago, I think. It's called, the book is called Rest is Resistance, and it's by Tricia Hersey, who's actually also a poet. But also is kind of referred to as the nap bishop. So she thinks a lot about, she has this whole ministry called the nap ministry. And Emily Brewer actually first told me about her, and then I happened to see like this book in the bookstore, and I was like, oh yeah, if I'm doing a rest and read sabbatical, like I got to put this on the list. So she really talks a lot about, from what I've read about the book, she talks a lot about sort of womanist perspective, and also how capitalism and white supremacy kind of drive that need to be working all the time and what it means to kind of pull back and really rest as a way to kind of disrupt those patterns. So I'm excited to see kind of how she does that and what happens with that. So that should be really fun.
That's great. Yeah, it's so funny. Emily and I were just talking about how we were going over something that's going to be in the bulletin. We won't talk about it too much, but we were going over how I was saying like, oh, like this sabbatical is well earned, and she was like, no, it's not. It's not something you need to earn. It's commanded. And I was like, you're absolutely right. Thank you.
Right.
But I love that idea that she's going with. It makes sense. It's very fitting.
Yeah. And so I think it's a great, it's great timing for me to be thinking about that, and very curious to see sort of what that's like. And then another book that's kind of not quite in that rest vein, but just kind of a little bit more. It's more, I guess, kind of oriented toward nature, but really made me think a lot about rest, and that's a newer book called Darkness Manifesto, and it has a lot to do with how light pollution really disrupts kind of our rhythms, and I've been really interested in the whole sort of idea of darkness and how we talk about darkness theologically. In theology we have a lot of contrast between dark and light, but we were just studying in Coffee and Theology a couple weeks ago about darkness and talking about how when God created in our creation story in Genesis 1, the first of those creation stories, that even the darkness is said to be good. And so how do we kind of think about that, and how does all the light that we're around, especially here in this big, urban setting of New York City, kind of disrupt some of our patterns of rest and other things. So not quite sure. That book is translated. It's a Swedish conservationist who wrote that, so I'm curious to kind of see what that perspective is like. Should be fascinating.
I love those themes of dark and light, because I do some writing, not very well, and a lot of those themes are about dark and light, and how why do we think darkness is always evil, and it's always written oh, the darkness was creeping in. It's is it creeping? Is it really that bad? So right. I'm curious about that as well. But that sounds much more. Is it much more about our environment?
Yeah, okay. Much more about kind of environment and environmental concerns around that. So I'll be kind of thinking about who's doing theology around that, and I think it's important theologically too with our our church's work on the History Project and our own anti-racism work, just to kind of think about those kinds of themes as well. So, absolutely. But I don't know, those two books in particular could end up being later on in the sabbatical, because, they sound like they will take a little bit more thinking work.
Save it for revving back up.
That's right. That's right.
I think that's a good schedule to have.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
Oh my goodness. All right. And then next up on your list, are we heading more into the poetry section?
Heading a little bit more into the poetry section, yeah. So one of the first things that I've been thinking about is a little group of books by a poet named Ross Gay, who has a couple of great poetry collections, but these are actually little essay collections.
Ooh, okay.
He started off a couple of years ago, wrote a book called The Book of Delights, which is kind of like daily gratitudes that he wrote sort of short essays around, and then he has a newer book out called Inciting Joy, which is similar. And I'm pretty excited about that because I was reading just kind of the beginning introduction of that, and that I think will make a little appearance in this coming Sunday's sermon, as a matter of fact. So
we get a little preview.
Really liked what he was talking about in relation to joy and how we, just how we seek joy in our lives and where we look for that, but also that sometimes we focus too much on only having joy, and so how kind of the flip of that makes things even more joyful. When we also have pain, there's also joy, but the ways that they're kind of connected. So as sort of only a poet can do. So I'll share some of his words as well in the sermon on Sunday.
Very
also.
good.
So.
I'm excited.
Yeah,
Don't spoil too much.
No, no. We've got to get people to come to church on Sunday or tune in.
Tune on in. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right.
And then I have a couple other just kind of poets. Some are sort of favorites that I'm thinking about right now. One is Ted Kooser, who folks may know. He was a poet laureate a number of years ago, and I think maybe won the Pulitzer for Shadows and Delights was one of his poetry collections. But I really got into reading him a lot recently because a mentor of mine around some poetry was talking about some of his pieces that he wrote that were kind of getting himself back into writing. I have a teacher who I talk about with, like a daily writing practice. And Kooser had a cancer diagnosis and went through treatment and then was having trouble writing again. So he has a good friend named Jim Harrison who he was, talking about like, well, how can I get writing again? And so he ended up writing his friend like little postcards every morning, which were basically like short little poems. And it's called Winter Morning Walks, and they're kind of embedded in some of his poetry collections, but that's what really got me into his writing. But he does a lot of different things with his poetry, so I really love his work and have read a couple of his collections, but I'm looking forward to reading a few more. I thought maybe I'd share one of the Winter Morning Walk poems if you wanted.
I'd love to hear.
This one's from March 11th of whatever year that was. And he says, "The sky is a pale yellow this morning, like the skin of an onion. And here at the center, under layer upon layer of brooding and ferment, a poet, and cupped in his hands, the green shoot of one word."
Ooh.
So.
What is that one word?
That's the question.
Oh.
But just like that, like he's so succinct, right?
Yeah.
But he does so much with so few words.
Yeah.
And so few kind of short phrases, the way he kind of lays out the poem. So he does a lot of really interesting things with not a lot of language. Right?
Yeah,
So.
and even though it's so short, there's like so much imagery there.
Yeah.
Like you're really picturing it. Like I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to go find his books.
That's right. Yeah, he has some really great ones. So lots of good stuff in there.
That's beautiful.
And then some of the poetry I'll be reading will be connected to things that will be going on here. Michael and Greg, I know, are talking with the rest of the team about a series on the Psalms in October.
Yes.
And that's going to be really exciting, I think, and really interesting for them and for the whole congregation. So they're picking, I think, some favorite Psalms, sort of a best of sort of series. But I'll probably read through the Psalms again, all of them, at least once or twice, and go back through and like pick some of my favorites and reread those. So I've got a little book that's published from the Jewish Publication Society.
Okay.
It's just the Psalms, and it will fit in my coat pocket, so I will probably carry that one around
So just
when it gets a little colder.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, yeah. It's gonna turn into Advent season, and you're gonna be going through your Psalms.
Yeah.
Oh my, do you have a favorite Psalm, just like off the top of your head?
Oh yeah, I always pick one I mentioned actually in Coffee and Theology, I think, this past week. But I always pick Psalm 29, which is a creation psalm, and it talks about the voice of the Lord being over the waters, and the voice of the Lord being really what conjured up all of creation. That's probably one of my favorites that I go back to over and over again. And I've got a few others in there, but that one in particular is always one that when I have the Psalms open, I always kind of flip to that one, make sure I read through that one. So.
Make sure it's still there. Okay, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I love that. So we're going to be doing the greatest hits here, but you're going to be going over all of them. So we're going to have an update on if you have any new favorites, reading it over again.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm excited to hear.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. And then I'll just mention one last thing that's kind of in this poetry world, but is actually a narrative book, and that's by also a poet, Camille Dungy, who has a recent book called Soil that some folks here in the congregation may have heard of because we've been using it for the prayer writing series that we're doing this month. And I just have really, I need to finish it. I've been telling the prayer writing group that I've been just kind of savoring it. Like, I'll read a little bit of it and then I'll put it down because she's just doing so much amazing work in that book. She's talking about her and her family's move to Fort Collins in Colorado. And she decides that in the landscaping kind of around their home, she's going to basically create a native garden. So she's really talking a lot about gardening, and if there's any gardeners kind of listening in, it's a fantastic book about that. But she also weaves in a lot about poetry, about kind of different classics within kind of the literature around nature poetry in particular, and asks some really insightful questions around race, around family. Like, what does it mean that a lot of our literature around what it means to be in nature, we seem to be alone? And what does it mean to be in relationship with kind of our gardens as a community? How is that different? And she's, I believe, if my memory is right from something I read recently, that she's a Presbyterian, or at least was attending Presbyterian churches. And so she has it's just loaded with theology in lots of different ways. So she talks about different things about hope and like her understanding of the creation story and how she's trying to pass the theology down to her daughter. It's really, really great book. So I'm excited that'll probably be one of the earlier things that I actually just, sit in the morning and read that for a little longer. When I don't have to get up and go to the train and do all that stuff.
What do you think are some of the topics from Soil that came up the most in prayer writing that people were focusing on and were inspired by?
Yeah. So what I usually do with prayer writing is kind of pick out some little sections of the book, and then I match that with the scripture reading. And then we have some prompts. We do lists first, and then we do some free writing. And then we do prayer writing kind of at the very end. So I skewed their interaction with the book a little bit by the topics that I picked.
Right.
But she actually does, I think because she's so focused on this communal aspect of how we relate to nature, or in this case, like her garden, she does a lot about neighbors. Like, what does it mean to be someone's neighbor? And really kind of pulling on that theological idea of like, who is our neighbor, like Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. And so we did that a couple of times, and this week we're finishing that series that will be, we're going to talk about hope. She has some interesting things about hope in relation to the garden. So, but she just picks up on all kinds of fascinating theological topics in there for sure. But community is a big one for her.
Did Mr. Rogers ever come up?
Oh, yeah. No, not yet, but I'll have to see, yeah.
I hope to hear some Mr. Rogers reports.
That's right.
Another wonderful Presbyterian.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. All right, and then you have one more?
Oh, yeah, just one more. And this is someone who I've been, I kind of come across little bits and pieces, and that's Natasha Trethewey, who was also one of the U.S. Poet Laureates. I was a Poet Laureate of Mississippi, and has written not only a number of really fantastic poetry collections, but a memoir, has written some follow-up kind of nonfiction after Katrina went through the South and New Orleans in particular. And so I'm excited to read a little bit more of her body of poetry. Bob Dunham, when he was here, I think had kind of mentioned a couple. We used to share a lot of poems. He and I both read a lot of poetry, so he'd shared a couple things with me, but I never really just sat down and really read her work. So I'm excited about that. That'll be somebody kind of new to me, and I like to sort of go through and read the poet laureates of the U.S. Tend to be like a good. I find those to be good, like, starting place. So I tend to read the women's voices in there, but as I mentioned, Ted Kooser is also in there, so there'll be a couple others as well. But the most recent women poet laureates, Ada Limon and Joy Harjo, are folks that I've read, like, a lot. So Natasha Trethway is, like, the next one down the list.
Okay. You're making your way down.
Yeah, so I'll be making my way down the list.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
So, with all this poetry, and you mentioned sonnets as well, do you write any poetry?
Oh yeah, so there's a good question. A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And just recently, I've been a writer kind of my whole life. I used to, lay on the grass when I was a kid and fill up like spiral bound notebooks with, mystery stories about, kids running around, trying to solve mysteries. I loved writing those, and I have an older series before that of Super Kitten. That was my like first and second grade project. Spilled a lot of ink on Super Kitten in those years, and so I dabble with all kinds of writing. And really, until the last couple of years, I never really wrote much poetry. I never thought that it was like a genre that I was very interested in writing. I've always loved reading it, but not writing. But yeah, no, so I do write a little bit of poetry here and there, so.
So would you ever share any someday?
I might be willing to do that at some point, yeah.
So
Later on when I get back. My big hope is that, I'll not only get into a reading practice, but a little bit more of a writing practice while I'm away. Again, I've done all kinds of things, following Julia Cameron's The Artist Way and doing morning pages. But I haven't found that to be a good rhythm for me recently. So part of what I'm hoping to kind of find is, what does that writing rhythm look like? So, yeah.
I'm glad you'll have some time to...
You were also a writer, though, right?
Kind of.
I've
worked on several small projects, a lot of like script writing, a lot of the fantastical ideas that we've been going over. Very much along the lines of Super Kitten.
Right.
But I also play Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, of course.
Which has a lot of writing. Which, if those who don't know, Dungeons and Dragons, it's basically an improvisation game that's played with dice. Yeah. But you have a story behind it that you lead your friends through. So that's a lot of writing. Mine is a lot of historical fiction. I'm researching a lot on the 1880s right now.
Oh, wow.
So it's a lot of research. I never was a history person, so it's really surprising to me, but now I have such an appreciation for history.
Oh, wow.
It really kind of brought it back out of me, and now I'm just like reading history books, and I never would have pictured myself doing that.
Oh, wow, that's great.
But
that's
great.
I
definitely dabble as much as I can.
No, that's great. And it's funny how that kind of brings out like those connections that you don't expect. I always think that's fascinating, whatever those are. So.
Whatever like brings you into a space of creativity, I think is great. You know, like so many people are like, oh, I could never write, I could never do art. But like once you sit down and like just have the time even, or something that sparks inspiration like that, then I feel like you can really get on a roll. Something important to me when I was writing at first was just pretending like it was going nowhere. Like I would just write something down, I'd be like, this doesn't matter where it goes. And some of that stuff is like what I still use today, and just imagine like no one's going to read this. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And once it is done and then I actually edit it, then it's like something that I actually like going back to read. So that's my writing process, at least, that got me to break out of the fear of writing. So
yeah, it's always kind of fascinating how that works, I think. And we, one of the things that reminds me of is prayer writing, right? We're very intentional to kind of let people know, like, you don't have to share any of your
Right.
writing with the group. And I actually think that's been a great part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
We chat, that's a little 20-minute class, and
Mm-hmm.
we chat for like 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning while everyone's coming in.
Right.
But we don't share any of our writing back with each other. It's just kind of a space where we're trying to just create some room for that creativity that you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. And I've been really excited and pleased to hear back from people like how much just having that space has meant to them, and how
Yeah.
much getting into that process has been such a great way to start their day. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said for that, as you're saying, like just being able to get in that space and
Mm-hmm.
let your mind kind of be in that creative energy a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of what I'm hoping for the
Yeah.
sabbatical as well. So just
I
have a
love
little more of that to be able to feed it, day after
Yeah.
day. Should be very fascinating to
I'm
see.
very excited to hear about it if you want to share when you return.
Yeah. So
That's wonderful. And also to note, prayer writing, since we were just discussing it, will be continuing for a little bit after you're away, which is
yeah, that's right. They'll
helpful.
take August and September
Mhm.
off, but then they are going to meet in October, and anyone's welcome to join that group.
Mhm.
We'll have the Zoom link and
Yeah.
everything for everyone. So yeah, so that'll be continuing, and
Mhm.
we have a really great program set up for the fall.
Yeah.
Again, I'm excited about my sabbatical, but I'm kind of sorry I'm going to miss some of these speakers.
I
They're
know.
really going to be fantastic. Bible study on Wednesdays will be
Mhm.
continuing. And that'll start up again in September,
Mhm.
and you'll be sharing with the congregation
Yeah.
all of those dates. And we have a really fantastic person coming to teach in September, October, November while I'm away.
Mhm.
He's a doctoral student at Union Theological Seminary,
Mm.
and his name is Tony Amori Alcori.
Mhm.
And I've met with him. We've talked a lot about kind of the group, and he's really excited to be here and to be teaching. I think the group is really going to enjoy him. And he grew up in Syria, so
Mhm.
he has is bringing a little bit of that perspective into things as well,
Right.
and is studying more in kind of the practical or religious education field at Union. So
Mhm.
studying with Mary Boys up there, so that would
Okay.
be great. And then there's a number of lay leaders who are teaching a little bit of Coffee and Theology, which is
Mhm.
a Sunday morning series. So David Poltz is going to do a couple of sessions in
Nice.
September. But then in October, early November, we have a treat as well, another outside speaker. Dr. Alan Cooper, who's at Jewish Theological Seminary, is coming, and he's going to teach on the Psalms.
Mhm.
And he's going to try to layer in about the same Psalms that the preaching series is on in October. We'll just be kind of running about a week behind
Mhm.
on those, which will give us a nice, make some nice connectors
Yeah.
there. And Dr. Cooper actually was one of my professors when I was there.
Really?
I had a
Okay.
class with him, I think maybe now on the Psalms.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so it was so funny because when I emailed him to see if he would come, he was like, "Oh yeah, and you asked me before," and I was like, "Oh, that must have been like 20 years ago now." Right after I graduated and came
Mhm.
here, I invited him down to teach. But I thought he was one of the best teachers I had ever had. So I'm excited for folks to get to meet him. And then in November, we have a couple more sessions. Nushin Framke, who's one of our
Mhm.
members, is going to lead one of the November sessions about the doctrine of discovery.
Okay.
And then Suzanne Mex, who's one of the co-chairs of our Facing Racism Action Group,
Mhm.
is going to do some follow-up with some of the work that's been going on with the History Project. So we've got a great lineup. Everything will kind of be, running as normal, and I'm excited to hear all about it.
Yeah.
When I get back. So I'm due back December 1st.
All right.
Which will be just in time for Advent and the Tartan Fair and all the December activity. But you have some plans for the podcast while I'm away as well.
Yes, we will be continuing the podcast. Definitely a lot along the lines of what we started with in the first episode, just kind of going over big questions that might come up. It might be hosted by some of our staff members, potentially Emily and Greg. I've been talking with Jenny a little bit, who is our youth family ministries director. And we've been talking about maybe having a few guest speakers come in from the youth group.
That would be awesome.
So I'm really excited for that. So hopefully we get something like that off the ground before you come back, so we have something to show you.
That'd be great.
Otherwise, a couple of series ideas that we might dabble with, more when you get back probably,
Right,
that
right.
I'm very excited about, is discussing a little bit about spirituality and Christianity in the media and what anyone on our staff, what you would think about it through the lens of the church. So I would be really curious to hear about a few even films, a lot of books as well, just like what do they mean? How do they compare? Are they comparable? And if they follow along with like the actual Bible stories that they might be playing off of. I'm very excited for that one. And one other that I am very excited about is, I'm excited for all of them.
But I think I know which one you're going to say.
Yeah, you know which one. I'm really curious about the non-canonical books of the Bible. Because I never was told about them growing up in Sunday school. That's not something that we ever talked about. So things like the book of Judas, what was the other one? The Nativity of Mary, which I never heard about. And another, Belle and the Dragon, which sounds like something that would be on your reading list or something.
That's right. Yeah.
But just a few of those that
and some of that last one is what we call apocryphal, right? Okay. So it's in the Apocrypha, in between. But yeah, those other ones kind of sit outside the canon, and there's lots of other ones as well that would kind of fall into that. So, and that's interesting because that's also been coming up both within Bible study and coffee and theology. There's been some real interest about that. In part, I think, because we've been talking so much about like how the scriptures came together and how the whole creation of the canon happened. So there's suddenly been like a lot of questions about, wait, what about these things that are outside of it? So yeah, that would be fun, and I think would be really connective with some of the things that we're doing and some of the other series as well. So that'd be great.
I'm very excited. So if any of those listening would have any ideas or big questions that we've been talking about lately, you can always click the link in the description of this podcast or go to fpcnyc.org/podcast. Or you can email me, which is in the description as well. But I'm very excited for all that we have planned, and I'm very excited that you get to go on your sabbatical as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia, and I'm looking forward to sharing out when I get back more about what I actually did read and what I kind of found on my rest and reading sabbatical. So more to share in 4 months. I'll be back.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sophia, and thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.